Routing patterns in the system are defined by means of so-called routing rules. On a very high level, a routing rule is an instruction to the switch on which vendors to use for traffic coming from a specific group of customers and going to a predefined list of destination mobile networks. All routing rules, together with rates, balances, and other carrier-related information, are cached by the routing engine so that it can pick up the most appropriate vendors for every SMS in real time. If we look at the parameters of a routing rule, the first one is the description. It's just a text field that should clearly and explicitly define the essence of the rule so that all your staff members could easily understand it. As for the rule type, there are three options here. Regular routing is when you need the system to actually select vendors to route traffic to. Block is when the system needs to block customers or vendors. And test is for setting up patterns to test vendors with small portions of live traffic to keep their stats up to date. A context is the name of the routing plan this rule belongs to. Every rule must belong to a context, and contexts are typically created for customer groups belonging to one and the same service type, like wholesale, premium, etc. But you can also create individual per customer contexts if you want to. For every rule, you also need to specify the start and end date and time. As for the isActive flag, you can immediately activate or deactivate the rule with it. The priority parameter directly defines the position number of the rule in the list of consideration for the routing system among other rules in the same context. The highest priority is 100. The lowest is 1. The higher the priority is, the sooner it will be considered by the system. Client product types. This parameter makes it possible to define routing rules for large groups of customers joined together by the name of the product they have. So, for example, you can tell the system that this rule will be only effective for customers whose products are called premium. By the way, the same goes for vendor product types. If necessary, you can pre-filter vendor products to make possible to use only premium vendors for routing under this rule. On the customer side, you can also create lists of manually selected customers. This rule will be effective if routing based on the client product types is not appropriate in this case. You have the ability to define inclusive or exclusive lists of destination mobile networks and MCC/MLC codes if necessary. And the choice list is where you actually define the number and sequence of vendors that will be used for routing in this rule. You can either define a static selection of vendors, just manually pick up products to route the traffic to, or you can define a formula that the system will be using to calculate the so-called vendor weight. A weight is a parameter that the system uses to understand how much priority this vendor needs to have on the routing list. So the vendor with the highest weight will be the one with the biggest priority, will be number 1 on the routing list. Vendors with negative weights are not considered by the system. Together with a formula or together with a static selection of vendors, you can specify a condition which can tell the system that alongside with the LCR formula that you have specified, you also want the system to check, for example, the ASR and the delivery rate for every vendor and apply the LCR formula only to those vendors who comply with the ASR and the DLR conditions. And finally, there is the next parameter telling the system what to do after the rule has been applied. Either to stop further routing, hand stop, or to continue search for other appropriate rules with smaller priority, continue search within the same context, or switch to context. So here you can tell the system that you want to continue the search in a different routing context.